Embark recently nerfed many of the guns dominating the meta in our creators. To find out what's best, we tested the versatility of all the weapons to determine their ranking in 2026 and help you win more PvP fights. Turns out, there's a couple of guns that are actually incredibly underrated. Alright, the Toro, you know we had to start here. The Toro is currently dominating PvP since the latest patch, so much so that people are genuinely asking why it hasn't been nerfed yet. This is because its damage drop-off is practically non-existent. I've seen posts of people calling this lore accurate, by which they mean, I think, less video gamey, in that shots will travel further. But in a game where the devs want the weapons balanced so that any gun is a viable option, the only way we can describe the Toro in its current state is borderline broken. Even a non-upgraded Toro without any mods equipped can still 2 to 3 shot both up close and at some medium ranges. Upgrade it to decrease its time in between shots and throw a shotgun choke on that bad boy, and you've got yourself a highly competitive weapon. Unless you're completely exposed and getting shot at with a high fire rate Bobcat or Torrente, you're probably going to win the fight. For this reason, the Toro remains an S tier weapon. Up next is the Ventor, and frankly speaking, I think the Ventor is in an interesting place right now. It's been nerfed a pair of times and people have deemed it considerably less viable, but I'm not sure I 100% agree, even though I see where they're coming from. While there is definitely some validity, as you can't just mag dump anymore and win every fight, we do still think it's an extremely good weapon and a great option to take into those Stellamontis runs. A Veni 4 with a vertical grip will make sure you're popping people from any range. Because the recoil on the Ventor pops your shots up a lot, having a vertical grip is perfect for those close to mid-range encounters, especially at something like the security checkpoint in Stellamontis. If you can master the cadence of the trigger, this is a weapon that still will win you most fights. Hit a couple headshots especially, and this is assuredly still an S tier weapon. Alright, let's talk about the Tempest real quick. There really isn't much to say about this gun. Medium ammo, automatic assault rifle, without a question, one of the most reliable guns in the game. Solid stability, great at range, and decent damage make this a very consistent firearm. For our money, the Tempest excels within a 10 to 20 meter range and is great for finishing fights if you run up against a team. Its only major downside is that it can chew through ammo significantly faster than the other medium ammo weapon in this tier. Otherwise, because of its all-around dependability, the Tempest remains an S tier weapon. And speaking of remaining S tier, let's talk Bobcat. Still, I think, one of the best guns in the game, as it can still absolutely laser in PvP fights, pending you've done some upgrading and invested some mods into the weapon. While it can eat through a lot of ammo, especially with a kinetic converter, this is still a gun that can absolutely melt shields in those close to medium ranges. If the Toro weren't broken, this might still be the best gun in the game. S tier weapon. And finally, to close out this tier, we have the Anvil, which is just an all-around versatile weapon at close, medium, and long ranges. An Anvil 4 with an extended barrel and the Anvil splitter, you are going to walk away absolutely dominating any fight in PvP and, frankly, even PvE. The biggest downside is how rare some of these Anvil splitters can be to come across. But with how cheap Anvils are to both make and upgrade, I think it's definitely a gun that is hugely overperforming, but still, nonetheless, an insanely good option. S tier. Up next is the Renegade, which frankly, I love using a lot. It's just that most PvP fights I get into now are largely in either indoor locations and in those more close to medium range distances. And in my opinion, the only major downside to the Renegade is its difficulty when in close range. By which I mean, there are just better options for you out there. If you prefer outdoor PvP, where you can pick people off at range or from rooftops, I think the Renegade is arguably maybe even an S tier weapon. But in most scenarios where PvP hotspots are centralized within POIs, I think there are just better options out there. For me, the Renegade is an A tier weapon, still a solid choice. Next up is the Torrente, which frankly I think is solid all around. Even a low-level Torrente can still handle various situations, making it, for me, extremely reliable. Its only major downside is how much it can eat through ammo. If you're wanting to make it out of these PvP encounters alive with a Torrente, pray and spray is really your best bet. For those close-range encounters, you're definitely going to want to pre-fire for the highest odds of winning your PvP fight, otherwise you might get melted by a Stitcher or a Bobcat, or maybe even a Toro that's on the other end. A tier. The Volcano is interesting because I think it's a really great shotgun and probably should be an S tier weapon, but there's a couple of things that hold it back, especially when you compare it against the Toro. One of its major downsides is that its spread isn't as tight as the Toro feels, making it less effective at those medium ranges, again, especially when you compare it to the Il Toro. Now, the mod investments do help it compete against the Toro, however, the upgrade and investment price is simply just too expensive for this to be a proper competitor against its shotgun counterpart. The only place I would really consider taking in a fully kitted out Volcano is during a Stellamontis night raid, where you can hold down the trigger and shut down a room. Otherwise, the Toro is just a far cheaper and better option all around. The Kettle is my gray tier old reliable. Not only is it extremely cheap to both make and upgrade, but I think is still highly competitive at both close and medium ranges, especially with its headshot multiplier. This gun I think is still highly competitive and extremely versatile in many encounters. Because of this, I think it's a solid A tier weapon. Similarly, we have the Stitcher, another reliable weapon, but again, needs upgrading and investments in order for it to really feel good, or at least feel as good as it did pre-patch and pre-nerf. Even though it can be a bit rough now in those medium encounters, its major pro is that it can keep up wonderfully in those close quarters fights. However, I think you've really got to be up close and personal to get the most out of the Stitcher now. If you start getting into more of that medium range, you're going to chew through ammo and you're going to have increased bloom, and you just aren't going to be as competitive. It's a solid gun all around still, but there's more issues with it now than some of the other options. And to be honest, it's probably a good thing it isn't competing against weapons of higher rarity. I think an upgraded Stitcher is fair and undeniably still A tier. Let's talk Beretta. Now, I know there are people out there who swear by this gun. They ride for the Berlettas. And you know what? I'm with you. I get it. I think this is a solid gun. I think its major downside, however, is that it can chew through ammo almost as fast as you do with Stitchers and Kettles. I think with smart positioning, the Beretta is a great gun to finish off weakened raiders, but 1v1 in the current meta, I think you're more likely to get outclassed if you aren't the one hitting the first shot and aren't incredibly precise with the headshot multiplier. Solid choice, the Beretta. I love you, but there are better options. This is a B tier gun. The Rattler, I think, is underrated, and I'm not afraid to say it. I will bear this cross. A Rattler 4 with some mod investments is an overall solid support weapon. This is me saying if you're playing solo, there are far better options to have in PvP encounters. However, if you're going in as a duo or a trio, the Rattler is incredible at helping finish off the job. Yes, of course, there are better options at close and medium ranges, but if you're wanting to clear out security or medical research, I think this is a wonderful weapon to have, especially if you pair it, I think, with a Toro or even another Beretta. Just a solid B tier weapon. I'm saying it, I don't care. Speaking of bearing a cross no one else wants to, I also think the Arpeggio is underrated, with the sole caveat that this should be a fully upgraded and modded weapon. Otherwise, you're really not going to get much out of it. The problem with the Arpeggio for me is that it feels much more situational and requires slower fights at specifically medium ranges. Otherwise, you're just going to get mag dumped on with one of the guns that are in the meta. I think the only thing I'll add is to not believe the hype of the kinetic converter on the Arpeggio. It's not going to reduce the time in between the bursts. It'll simply make the 3 bullets from each burst fire out faster. Save the kinetic converter for a Bobcat or a Torrente. B tier weapon, it's just a little limited. All right, the Pharaoh. I love the Pharaoh. It is amazing in the early game. It can two-shot to down someone at range if they're wearing a light shield, which I think is absolutely great, especially if you catch them off guard. You're playing duos or trios and you catch a team in the middle of looting. Everyone focuses fire on one guy. Suddenly their team is down a player. Come on now. Come on now. Absolutely amazing. However, any other more intense encounters, the time between shots on the Pharaoh is simply too high, even with a fully upgraded Pharaoh. The best strat, therefore, is to hit your first shot and then swap to weapons to finish the job. Because of this, even though I love the Pharaoh, it is a B tier weapon. All right, let's talk patina. To be honest, I almost forgot about this weapon. That is how badly the patina needs a buff. Now, I'm not going to come out and say the patina is an overall bad weapon. I just don't think that's largely true. But I do think the criticisms for this weapon are not just fair, but need to be addressed. This is a weapon that is hugely much better for PvE encounters than it is for PvP fights. Because of its expense to craft and upgrade, there's just far better weapons you could use those same resources for. It's still solid, but because of that, the patina is at the low end of the B tier. And finally, we have the hairpin, which I think is fun to use, but not really a go-to PvP weapon unless you're going out to have some fun and you've got no skin in the game. Just engaging in PvP for the love of the game. This is a C tier weapon, let's be honest. C tier. The Osprey is a fun weapon. In those mid to long range fights out in the open, I think cracking shields of enemy raiders with the Osprey is incredibly fun and satisfying. Not only does it deal decent damage, but in the right hands, it can be an absolute menace. However, I'm not Tfue, and neither are most of us, making the Osprey much more of a niche gun. It is not a bad gun, but I think its importance in the game is much better suited for completing trials in PvE than it is for most of the encounters you'll come across in PvP. For that reason, it is also a C tier weapon. I mean, is there really even a reason to have more than one in your stash? I don't know, man. I don't know. Am I underrating the Osprey? Let me know. Let me know. All right, if you noticed, we didn't talk about any of the legendary weapons like the Aphelion, the Equalizer, or the Jupiter. I'm going to keep it a buck with you. I just don't know how viable these guns are in PvP. They're extremely expensive to craft, and I just don't think they compete against the likes of any of the other PvP weapons. Especially when most encounters are close to mid-range, there's just far better cost-efficient options out there for you. Save these for PvE. We're just not even going to rank them in PvP, to be honest. And that is our tier list. Let me know which weapons you think are the best to take into PvP fights. I'm sure there's going to be some disagreement with some of these weapons, and honestly, I would really like to hear you out. So please feel free to drop down a comment below. If you like this video, remember to like and subscribe to keep up with all of our Arc Raiders videos. The tongue twister. And until next time, my name is Christian with The Gamer. Good luck topside, and we'll see you in the next one.